and welcome to A Farewell to Zoom, ? The question mark's important to me because today's conversation is, as most of you will know, a knowledge exchange event organised by Torch and a curtain raiser for this offbeat festival, which is happening both on Zoom and also with a live audience. I'm Wes Williams, Director of Torch at the Oxford Research Centre in the Humanities, and we're coming to you live from Arts at the Old Fire Station in Oxford. For the first time in 2021, we have a live audience here in the room with us, and it's very exciting. And I was just talking to Jeremy earlier. This is the first time that this room, I think, has been used in this way since March last year.
Not quite. It's the first time I've been in this space since March last year.
Okay, so this is, a big deal. We are socially distancing. Our live audience are masked while safely live streaming this event, and we hope that you're all safe and well wherever you are in the world. Before I introduce our speakers, let me remind you that you can post your comments and questions on the YouTube chat as usual. I'll bring them back into the conversation as we go along. At Torch and through the Humanities Cultural Programme at the University of Oxford, we generate and co-produce a wide range of activities fueled by research. Knowledge exchange projects such as this involve mutually beneficial collaboration between university researchers and external organisations or individual artists and the public. We're constantly seeking new ways to enrich collaborations with theatres and performers in particular. If that sounds like you, and you have a project that you'd like to discuss, please get in touch with us, and specifically with our theatres officer at Torch, Ruth Moore, whom I'd like to thank for doing most of the organising and curating of today's event. We're grateful also to the KE Seed Fund for their support of this series of conversations over the past few weeks, as we've heard from researchers and artists, some of whom are in the room with us today, about the mighty challenges of the last year and more for the theatre industry in particular. Challenges, but opportunities too. And today, just a week or so since some theatres have tentatively opened their doors to the paying public, we're here to ask whether it is time to say farewell to Zoom, ? And also to the other platforms that have made digital performance possible whilst the theatres have been closed. Or is digital performance, from live streaming to V and AR and all the other Rs, and any other number of possible hybrid experiences in between, is this the future or part of the future for us all? Later on, I'll be talking more to Jeremy Spafford, Director of Arts at the Old Fire Station, who tells me that 18 months ago, when he was asked about digital strategy, he thought people were asking him principally about marketing, social media, and not much else. He has, by his own admission, had his mind blown and his understanding of the digital changed by the multiple experiences and experiments, both here at OFS and beyond over the last year and more. But for now, our first pair of speakers are perfectly placed to open up the possibilities of the digital for us. Sarah Ellis, first of all, is an award-winning producer, currently working as Director of Digital Development for the Royal Shakespeare Company. Her brief is precisely to explore new artistic initiatives and partnerships. The latest partnership for the RSC is the Audience of the Future live performance demonstrator funded by Innovate UK, a consortium consisting of arts organisations, research partnerships and technology companies to explore the future of performance and real-time immersive experience. In addition to numerous accolades for her contributions and to particular shows, which I imagine you might talk about, Sarah's also got a rich experience of producing work in venues long before, or in an earlier iteration, if you like, of what it meant to be online, including in the Albany Theatre, Soho Theatre, Olvic Tunnels, South Bank Theatre, Soho Theatre, as I've said, and Shunt. In conversation with Sarah is Professor Emma Smith, Professor of Shakespeare Studies at the University of Oxford. Emma's research combines a range of approaches to Shakespeare and early modern drama, as well as drama in performance, and the methodology of writing about theatre. Her 2019 book, This is Shakespeare, was a Sunday Times bestseller, amongst other things, and has been translated into several other languages than English. Digital for her also means thinking about digital scholarship, and she's worked with a range of theatre companies too, including the Royal Shakespeare Company, the National Theatre, and Donmar Warehouse. Emma edits the journal Shakespeare Survey, published by Cambridge University Press. And for the first 20 to 25 minutes, we're going to hand over for a conversation between Sarah and Emma. Over to you now. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Wes. Well, it's great to be here, isn't it, Emma, in 3D? And it's also great to be there which we've been for a really long time in our Zoom squares.
Yeah, we were talking as we were doing the sort of prep for this. Where's that green light that we all have to look at? You know, where should we be orienting ourselves? And that really does feel the sort of the Marshall McLuhan medium is the message. Really, is I think what we're doing this afternoon. This slightly awkward, stilted, hybrid version is very much June 20. Whatever year it is, 2021, isn't it? It's a sort of partial emergence, perhaps only a temporary one, as we sort of negotiate what it's like to be together, but recognizing, I think, as Wes suggested, that those hybrid forms are here, probably here to stay.
Yeah, it's true, and that's okay, and we're all right with that. And we need to sit with that for a bit, and we need to reflect with that, because if the question marks are all out there, aren't they? We are working with uncertainty, and we are seeing uncertainty. In the beginning of the pandemic, that was all we had, wasn't it? We had these squares, and that allowed us to get our work out. And as we come back, or move forward in being together again, and awkwardly so, you know, us learning how to people again, to forget that would be a shame, I think. So in this time, it's like we look at what we've lost, but what have we found? What have we found in that moment, and how important that is? We were about to do a show, probably the least COVID appropriate show ever, in Stratford upon Avon, and we had just recorded the orchestral music for it at Alexandra Palace the day before lockdown, and it was a real difficult moment where we had to stop production and we had to look at our freelancers and make sure everyone was paid. And there was another question there, which is, how are you? Had such a loaded term, and to find that suddenly in-person moment, to then not being able to be with people to see how they were, was a really big deal. And as we come out of this, the first thing you're looking at is real people going, how are you? But also knowing that we are blended and are speaking to people where we have been together. We have been together in a really different way.
Do you know, so what I'm interested in is whether the impulse is to try and, in all kinds of spheres, but I suppose the theatre is what we're mostly focusing on, is the impulse to sort of just forget all this awfulness and go back to how things were in whatever way, and or is it to sort of build on where we are, where we've got to? Because I don't know about other people listening. I have absolutely missed live theatre, and I wouldn't be able to sit on this sort of semi-stage if I didn't really genuinely feel that. But I also wonder if some of what has been said about live theatre that has not been happening hasn't been a little bit sentimental and sort of normative in a way that suggests all people are metropolitan theatre goers in the evenings, you know, however sort of bodied they are, or however their family life works, or, you know, that's the sort of norm, and we've all missed that. And I wonder if, I suppose one thing I'm thinking about and slightly concerned about is that there isn't a reactionary move towards an idea of theatre which is in some ways quite limited. I mean, one of the things I loved about what you were just about to talk about theatre, 21st century theatre, was how already blended it was becoming, what interesting things people were doing with live video, what interesting experiments there were with all kinds of sort of technologies and enhancements and headsets and you know, all that kind of stuff. And are we going to lose that, do you think? Or
I hope not. That would be my reductive one-liner tagline. I hope not. I think that what happened was this form of accelerated disruption. So we'd been slowly emerging into those hybrid worlds. Yeah. And then suddenly, with the pandemic, it cracked open the future in the moment that we were in, and exposed the fact that we're very much first draft in this space. Yeah. And that we need to make sure that we sit with the fact that we haven't found all the solutions in this time. We are first draft, and we can iterate that. But if, as a glass half full person, I'd like to think that what it's brought that together, and that maybe what was happening before is there was a pervasive inequity happening, so that we'd have access to these digital tools, and we'd be able to iterate in our places of buildings and such like. But we did this piece of audience research at the beginning of the pandemic to help us pivot what we were going to do online. And three things clearly came back to me, which were, or to us in this moment, was people were craving togetherness, they were craving liveness, but there was a huge digital inequity in people's homes. And I was like, how can we make this work using the most cutting-edge immersive VR headsets if only a few amount of people can access them? Mm-hmm. And it's the same with buildings, and it's the same with cultural spaces, is that, are we accessible? Are we inclusive? You know, are we thinking about the broad range? And that actually is what happened in the pandemic, is that people have turned their homes into cultural spaces. And for the first time, we have had to go to people's homes by invitation and be with them together in a different way. And I think that I'm hopeful that by addressing the inequity around digital technology, that we must make the work for the 2009 phone as much as the most cutting edge technology, but it doesn't stop the scale and it doesn't stop the ambition. And I also hope that those audiences can access us in what way they feel comfortable in. So they can come into our building and feel that is their home, and they have a connection. And that I think we have to be careful that we don't create silos now and actually look at hybrid as a positive pluralism. And we need a plurality of voices if we're going to move forward holistically in that way.
That's really interesting, because I suppose one of the things there are two things that come out of that in a way for me. One is that from our positions, me at the University of Oxford, you at the Royal Shakespeare Company, there could be people out there in both of our spheres saying, well, it's kind of all right for you guys.
Yeah.
And the pandemic it always has been, and the pandemic has exacerbated that. So it'd be interesting to talk about the sort of the broader ecosystem, I guess. And how do you think that's changed?
I think that we have an ability to have a global conversation by who we are and what we're about and what timeline we sit on and where we are, and we have a huge responsibility within that to check ourselves on that. And you could argue it's all right for you and blah blah blah, but I think that's right. We should do that, and we should check ourselves. But also, what I've seen is the massive entrepreneurialism of independent artists, and a huge entrepreneurialism in making work. Yeah. There was a huge at the beginning of the pandemic. It was like artists are doers, they're makers, they craft, and they couldn't, and so they worked with the constraint. And we still got work out there, and we still shared that work. And what was lovely is you saw the global programming. There was more of an equity around what we did at the RSC, and then an independent company do a whole play on Zoom and have an audience equally, if that makes any sense. And and I think we need to recognise that we're in that space. We're now programming globally. We're not local so much at the moment too.
I wonder if that's going to be a loss, because I was thinking about, one of the great local disruptors and innovators, I think, has been Creation Theatre, who I think have been completely fantastic and awesome through this. And how my sense of Creation before this was that they were really known for innovative use of spaces around Oxford, and they felt a really, really local, grounded, sort of geographically specific, working to build audiences for different kinds of plays. And it's brilliant to see them shifting online, and I wonder what will happen to the local, or whether we're post-local now, in a way, or the local is, we'll go and get a cup of coffee from an independent coffee person who has picked up the slack. Now people aren't going to prep anymore because they're not going to work. Is that the local? And our theatre or our culture is going to be global, and we're going to be citizens of a wider cultural sphere.
I think we could go hyper-local and hyper-global.
Yeah.
And that would be super interesting.
Let's do that.
Let's do that. And we've got that both happening here. Like, if we look at the demographic of this audience, and we may have a different demographic in our global audiences, and that's the interesting thing, is how do we make our work in that hybrid world? What do we have to say, both locally and globally? How do we find those forms of connection? And and what was good before the pandemic about the digital space is that if you stopped talking about the tools and actually started talking about the people and the change, that the disruption, is we were always looking at ritual. We were looking at the rituals around how you connect and the rituals about theatre. And I believe that what we learned during the time of making the online work is that those rituals are so important. And that, you know, to put for example, going forward, we have sort of made our work, but how do we hold that work? How do we provide the connection point? And when we did Dream, I thought it was always about the performer audience. We were like, how do you get the connection between the performer and audience like this? Oh my word, it's audience to audience. It's that friction and that world, and audiences showing up together, that audience talking to each other. And I wonder how we look at, you know, that this is your 5-minute call, that buzz you get before you go in, and how do we create that in a connected world where your home again is your cultural space. So, you know, thinking about sending packages that you can open in real time and that everyone's opening together. So it goes back to what the purpose of theatre is, isn't it? Togetherness.
The rituals are really, I think, are really, really interesting. Just in a tiny bracket, it's so striking to me that however formal a meeting you go to on Zoom, everybody waves at the end. I mean, they would never wave in real life. They would just shuffle their papers and get up. But everybody says, but, you know, I suppose they are sort of framing gestures, aren't they, about how we negotiate the kind of thresholds of the space. And we've been used to those in terms of performance, and we've made sort of without even really knowing it, we've made them.
I love it.
Made them
We've made our ritual. I'm loving the fact that I'm going to do a wave in my first real life meeting. See how that goes down. But it's so true, and I think that sometimes as curators of content or places of whether you're in academia or whether you're the maker of work, you assume that you are the purveyor of those rituals. And what I've learned is know that audiences are the purveyors of those rituals too. Like you say, we're self-evolving wavers, or we're connecting on social, or we're making comment. And we had loads of these pictures where people had taken pictures of how they were watching the work, and they'd like, you know, some people were like with their glass of wine, or some people had made like Midsummer Night's Dream sort of settings around their computer. People were saying they were watching it together. Audiences showed, in this pandemic, audiences showed up, didn't they? They really showed up. And that as we look at that hybrid space, we had Zoom conversations where some patrons were like, actually, I find it a lot easier to engage with you online because I have access needs, and it's actually a very challenging pathway to come into the building and the organisation, and I can make my environment suit me and experience you. And so our job is to, in a way, amplify the connection online and look at how we do that better and further, and remove maybe old analogue cultural biases.
Yeah. So one of those, I wonder, is, do you think we'll be making work which anticipates that people will focus on that solely, as they would sort of have to do, at least externally? I mean, they could be thinking whatever they want, but they can't be doing the ironing or making the tea or on their phone or something.
Yeah.
Will we be making work which tries to recreate that form of concentration in the domestic and now cultural space? Or do you think we'll be making work which already has priced in the fact that everybody's probably using the fact that they're at home to do another 5 things at the same time?
Well, our attention has changed, hasn't it? It's sort of like entertainment cycles online are rapidly evolving, like daily, or Instagram as a form of reading, for example. So the assumption that you'll sit through a 3-hour play in different contexts, it's a worse or a better thing. It's just that we will need to adapt how we look at form. Form will change. Will new form come through it that is evolved through theatre? How do we look at not just 2D co-presence, but immersed 3D-ness? So we're in 3D now, I hope. Otherwise, I'm on my own. But we're still 2D with our friends who are not situated with us. How do we create 3Dness? You know, what are the new big questions for us in academia and in theatre? And you've seen that, you know, in Shakespeare's time, there were plagues, there were pandemics, and they brought out new, you know, people went high, didn't they? In their
They
thinking.
did go high, I think, that's right. They did go high. And I don't think they're thinking about how useful that analogy has been. I mean, it's done a lot of cultural work, hasn't it, over the pandemic? You know, what did Shakespeare do in the plague? And I'm not sure how helpful it is for us to think about theatre, the theatre parallels, except in what you said. Theatre makers are creative and they get their stuff out. And it seems that as soon as theatres reopened after plague times, people rushed out with stuff or had stuff ready and sort of went for it. And audiences, so far as we can tell, seem to have been willing to go back. It's so interesting, that sense about, you know, the immersive. I mean, that's, again, in the history of sort of reading or something, that's, again, such a normative idea that proper cultural engagement is sort of fully and sort of shuts out all other distractions, and that's a sort of full engagement, bodily kind of mental engagement with the work. And I wonder if immersive looks like an analog. I mean, I do know about immersive technology and stuff, but I wonder if immersive looks like something, a hangover from the analog, and that we maybe need to revalue something that's a bit more fleeting or surfing or scrolling, or something that sort of addresses and doesn't just denigrate attentions now, because it's too easy, isn't it, to say, oh, the internet's making us stupid, or you know, we've lost something. In fact, what we've just done is learn to
totally multitask. I mean, who hasn't texted on Zooms, on your WhatsApp? You know, I mean, come on. Like,
absolutely.
We've done that, and I think it's quite right. If we look at all the platforms and all the distribution mechanisms as repositories of stories, but how we hold that, one thing I think we need to respond to, and it's a really interesting point around relevance and our relevance going forward, is popularism, and how, because I was like, well, what, you know, we're in this time, what is it that arts and culture can do? What is it that matters? It's like we're holding the big questions, and if we're in this really fractured society where we're having to learn how to people again, and we're having to learn how to gather again, then theatre and storytelling can give you a space to sit with it and hold it. And I think that but remember, those spaces don't need to be in the forms that we worked with before. It can be impactful. You can place a story on Instagram. You can place a story here, and it's about how you hold that space and how we look at popularism and look at how we disrupt that and how we find connection. I believe it will be, what stories do we want to say coming out of this, isn't it? And how we don't shy away from, if you can't be radical, if you can't be audacious now, if you can't take risk. At the time when I've seen so many amazing artists take risk and put their work out there, and how receptive audiences were to finding that connection, we should be very hopeful about that. And that opening a door doesn't mean you're closing your door to the internet. It just means we're emerging again.
What do you think about people who are just thinking, well, I'm just really looking forward to a proper production of As You Like It, probably a tree,
amazing,
and you know, is that? Have we still got a space for them, or are we just saying you are so 2019, sweetheart?
No.
We're over that. We're over the tree.
We're over the tree.
We're over the kind of straight performance.
No, I think that's happening. We're doing that. We're doing that, and I think that, I hope when we sit in those spaces, actually we might value them a lot more and see them differently. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to my very, very warm glass of white wine and my peanuts just before a show, and sitting. Do you know, one of the things that I remember about live performance that really struck with me? I went to see a performance of Dream in New York, and it was an immersive one, but this we were at these tables, and this amazing woman sat next to me, and she was so engrossed in it, and she was talking, you know, she was animated with it, sat next to me, and I watched her for half the performance. And that, for me, is what being in theatre is about, is us being together, sitting together, lights go down, and having that connection. And I can't imagine anything replacing that. And I think that we have to come out of this pandemic in a confident place to recognise how we have innovated, not at the cost and not at the expense, and that's the respectful connection. And I think that if we can look at bringing that together and going, I can't think of anything better than sitting, you know, us going to the theatre together to watch a show.
Yeah.
And
it's great to think that we might police audiences a little bit less.
Yeah.
If we're all saying, oh, it's so great to be all back together, we might not be so annoyed that being back together means that other people make a noise and laugh at things that you don't think is funny. Because there is a strange sort of double line, isn't there? That we all say, oh, it's so great to be all together experiencing this, but we also, you also got to behave and don't rustle. I love it if you go to a concert and it says, don't rustle, it can be very distracting. So there's, it would be, I think that would be a great thought, that if we were more confident in each other as part of things rather than, people to be sort of pushed aside, that would be amazing.
And in our homes, that's what we've not had.
Sure,
So I think
we should probably hand back to you.
Yeah, no, well, I was just thinking at the end of your conversation, it's actually been really enjoyable just to be here in the same sort of vector, if you like, as you guys. In other words, both part of a discussion and also sort of alongside you. So your point about what you were saying. Sorry?
Let's not call it a vector, which seems just a little bit transmissive.
All right, line.
Yeah.
No, what I mean is, like you were saying, Sarah, about being at the same table as somebody watching something or being part of something that actually you'd made. In a sense, that's what I mean. So we set up this conversation, you're having it, we're part of it, and that's actually really new. We haven't done that for such a long time, and it's actually really enjoyable. And I was thinking, oh, am I rustling too much over here, and how much do you... So I think all of those rituals, what I'm taking away from your conversation partly is about the rituals of being in the same space as other people. And exactly that stuff about... obviously I love all the waving at the end of meetings, but also how many meetings have we been in the last year where we've been doing other stuff whilst in the meeting? Now, you can't quite do that in a governing body meeting or something like that within a college structure because you're in the same room. But that's also going to be absolutely part of the question, is how focused or specific has attention got to be? And of course, one hopes you don't lose that space amongst other spaces. I thought the other thing to pick up from your conversation for me was quite early on in it, where you were talking about digital inequity on the one hand, but also being invited into people's homes on the other, and that tension between that, or that joined upness of thinking around that seems to me really, really important, both for the university and for cultural spaces. I mean, the university is kind of a cultural space too, but I mean, for theatres and so on, I think that's a really big question. And to do a bit of a bridge might be a question that we think about, Jeremy, because it seems to me one of the things that, if we shift focus around to our conversation, what we thought we might explore in this bit of the conversation is moving from, if you like, RSC and university to a different kind of relationship. In other words, a smaller scale organisation like the Old Fire Station, and a hybrid organisation like the Old Fire Station, because you do a whole bunch of different things here. And the question of, so for the people who don't know and are out there in the bigger world, Old Fire Station is an art centre at the heart of Oxford. It both generates and showcases local and international, and what I'm now be calling post-local and hyper-global on the back of today's conversation, all sorts of performances, artworks and so on, theatre that takes a risk, be it social, ideological and or artistic, but also theatre that entertains. It does a whole bunch of different things here, one of which is to co-produce the Offbeat Festival with the Oxford Playhouse, of which this event forms a part. So Old Fire Station does many things. Old Fire Station was already involved in that movement that, again, you guys talked about a bit, which was where already from, for the last 20 years, theatre's been integrating within itself a whole range of other digital, film, sound technologies. But I think it's fair to say that before the pandemic, Old Fire Station didn't have a digital program.
Absolutely. I mean, just over a year ago, we wouldn't have been confident doing this. We'd have had to hire in the cameras and some people to operate them, whereas they're our cameras, and we've got Rachel knows how to use them because she is brilliant, who's our digital and technical manager, previously our technical manager. So we've kind of moved really fast in our small way. I mean, just interesting, picking up on one of the first things you were talking about is that we're not just hybrid in terms of art form and in terms of, you know, how we operate. We're actually a strangely hybrid building in that we share this building with the Homeless Charity Crisis. And of course, one of their major preoccupations during the pandemic was most of the people they worked with had no access to anything digital whatsoever. So there was a huge push just to get phones and tablets and anything that enabled people to get online out to the hotels or hostels, wherever where people were being placed, and just so that they could communicate, but also then take part in some of the things that we do and others do. So that the business of access is clearly always an issue in terms of the building, but it's equally significant in terms of access to digital. So we would say that digital has been fantastic for access, because there's a whole bunch of people who would never normally be able to come in here, either because they couldn't afford to come into to travel in, or because of disability or mobility issues or anything else. So that has been great, but there's still a problem within that even some people have problems with access to digital. So that's an ongoing issue. But I do, yes, I mean, you know, as you said at the beginning, I'm of a certain demographic, and I would sort of tend to roll my eyes when people were asking me for our digital strategy, because I really couldn't get my head around why I had to spend so much time on it, because we're a theatre. I mean, our job is to get people to come in here and enjoy our gallery, come to workshops, come to shows, you know, so the only point of digital was to persuade them to come here. And so the transition for us has been not only, so suddenly the only thing that we wanted to do was the only thing that we couldn't do. So suddenly we had to do the thing that previously we were interested in, and it just opens so many things up in terms of how we make theatre, how to program. So it changed, we bought kit, we trained ourselves, we've worked with people we've never worked with before. You know, Alex Koku programs for us, he's programming digital, he's producing in the digital sphere, he's marketing in the digital work, which he's never really done before. As I said, Rachel, who's out there managing this whole event, has now become a digital lead and digital expert. So, and our attitude to it has changed enormously. But I still think with I'm sure we'll come on to this, but it kind of what now, as we start to open up, and what we hold on to and what we don't is that I can't give you an answer to it, because I think it's really important not to answer it. I think it's really important to roll with it and continue to explore it, rather than say, oh, we're not doing that anymore and we'll definitely do this. But we've got some hunches about what we'll want to take forward.
I'm hearing you then very honestly say, look, this word pivot, you didn't say pivot,
No,
but we have suddenly discovered this whole set of worlds, not just one world, a whole set of worlds that weren't part of what we did, but that are now going to be, have been part of what we've been doing. And then the question is how much of that stays with us. And I mean, from a point of view of Torch, as somebody who's been sort of heading up Torch, the Oxford Research Centre, we have a very, very similar experience. Our Torch was largely about getting people to come in and talk in the university, to some degree go to other places, but mainly get people in a room and talk together. And that room has suddenly become digital space, online space. We can all talk about the enormous benefits of that in terms of demographic, in terms of reach, in terms of accessibility.
We got promoted in the New York Times for one of our shows.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's not. We don't expect to get promoted in the New York Times for a show at the old fire station in Oxford.
Yeah.
And we had audiences in kind of India and South Africa for work, and you know, referenced by a group in Uganda. All not huge numbers, but the fact that that was even a possibility is quite bizarre for us.
And that, as Sarah was saying, that reflects back onto the sort of ability and responsibility of platforms like the RSC and Oxford University to continue that work, continue being a platform for work from elsewhere and other places. And so, in other words, not just to broadcast ourselves further, but to actually integrate and be inclusive in ways that we haven't, that we've imagined before possible, but that actually have proved to be possible. And I think that's a really one of the things we're all collectively going to be thinking about going forward. Just from this morning, though, it's really clear that as we get back into buildings and try and have Zoom calls in the same office, it's really hard.
Oh, God, yeah.
So, we can all get excited about hybrid in the future, but actually the rituals, again, of can I listen, can I be on this phone call while somebody else is on the same phone call, they can be really difficult. So we can think about the positives a lot. I just wonder if we might think about, for a minute, about the challenges, as you say, which bits are we going to take forward, and without over-guessing, what's going to be difficult?
So I think that the first thing is, digital isn't one thing. It's so many different things, and we're already noticing as a small scale kind of, we haven't got a big tech team, we haven't got big budgets to associate with any of this stuff. So what do people want to engage with and what don't they? And in our limited experience so far, is that interestingly, the things that are most popular are things that are live. So our on-demand stuff, it's like, we think it's good, but actually, there's so much you can see online that's on demand that's really good. Why would you see a not brilliantly put together live filmed piece in here when you could watch something? Whereas being present at the same time as other people online somehow is still attractive. So there's something about what we're finding is that if for Offbeat, for example, the things the in-person events sell fastest. Still, people like, that's the first thing people want to do. They can come and see it in live. That's what they want to do. That's the first thing that sells. The second thing that sells is live streaming, and the thing that trails way behind is on demand. That's what we're currently seeing. We'll see. We've got a few weeks to go. See how it picks up. And so there's something in that I think is interesting, which is that we don't ever expect to be producing work that can compete or will be attractive to a global audience in terms of production values and so on and so forth. And we won't even try. But what we can still do is bring audiences together that have some kind of association with us and connection with us, and for some reason can't get into the building or don't want to, but still want to be part of what we're doing. And then I think the other critical thing we can do is we can open this up to artists. So, what I think our major contribution going forward, no idea how to earn an income from this, but still we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But the main thing we're going to be doing is saying to artists, here's a space, here's some cameras, here's some people who know how to use them, make some work. And you can make work, and you can be making work with other venues at the same time, with artists who are in other places. You can play around in here, and we're not precious about that, and you can experiment here. And I don't know this, but possibly in a way that, especially early career artists who we work mainly with, which unlikely they'll be able to get that access in a bigger organisation that is focusing on producing the big ticket items. So I think that we're in a position to offer that. And if you mentioned Creation, who have done amazing things over the last year, just experimenting around animation, around games, alongside live theatre, and just playing with ideas and all the rest of it. Well, I think there's just loads of artists who, a bit like us, were a bit scared of all that. And thinking, well, that's not what I do, and also I don't know how to do it, so why would I? And actually going, maybe I could play with it. And I know people, who at this moment are, choreographing a piece of work from here. It's happening in Singapore with a bunch of dancers in Singapore. It's things that you would just never imagine you could possibly contemplate doing.
I mean,
that's
in a
what I
way
hope we
that
can do.
yeah, in a way that it connects back to Sarah, what you call about the entrepreneurialism of some of a group of artists, and also maybe even back to the kind of post-pandemic moment in Shakespeare. In other words, people have got all this energy, this creative energy, that they haven't been able to somehow instantiate in work. And now's the time maybe in which people can go, right, yeah, let's try, let's play. And I think you're absolutely right that spaces like this can be spaces for play and for experimentation, both in this room and this room in relation to other spaces, whether they're homes or other digital kind of environments elsewhere in the world.
Though it is hard. It is the income thing.
I was just going to say
it is an issue.
Yeah. How do you monetize that? How do you raise funds from that?
We can't. People won't pay more than a fiver, and why would they? Why should they? To watch something online that is coming out of here, and that's fine. And a lot of the time we're not asking them to pay anything. We can pay what they want, as it were, as a donation, and that's absolutely that makes perfect sense in terms of the work and the audience and the relationship we're trying to build there. It doesn't make any sense in terms of running a business, and it's more expensive every time at the moment anyway. When we get back to full capacity, if we're live streaming, we're losing seats in what is already a very small venue, and because we have to get the cameras in and all the rest of it, and we're paying extra technicians. So the process of getting this stuff out there costs more money, and we're not getting a ticket. We're not currently getting an income stream from tickets for that. So that's not a reason why we won't do it, because we always kind of take the approach, let's do it and then let's solve the problem. But I do think it's not as straightforward. At the moment, we haven't seen the opportunity for this becoming an income generator for us. And then, so either it's something that becomes part of what people are prepared to subsidise because of what it's offering in terms of the development of artists and development of work, and in terms of inclusivity and access, which is great, or we find clever ways of monetising it in some way. So I do think that's around. I don't think we have to solve that now, but we're going to have to figure our way through it.
No, I think, again, we'll bring Sarah back into this in a minute, but I think a number of theatres have sort of declared, right, we're going to live stream everything from now on. And that's clearly an ambitious move, but it's also clearly a kind of move in a slightly competitive marketplace at the moment. And I think that puts pressures on outfits like yours to say, well, hold on a minute, every seat counts. And how do you make those decisions? And I can see that's a really the other thing that you might think about in terms of live streaming. I mean, I watched The Dream, and I was really interested in the fact that you could pay a bit more to do a bit more. In other words, to be more immersive and so on. And I liked that, but I also thought it raised the whole sort of inequity question in all sorts of interesting ways. Are we going to get into an on-stream performance world where you have to pay a bit more? Now, that's already true. You pay more for a drink and so on. So the rituals around. So Sarah, if you don't mind coming in here. In other words, your experience with The Dream, have you got something to add to this sort of, how do we make money from this or not make money from it or support new work in this space?
So one of the really important aspects of the funding for Audience of the Future was to test new commercial business models. We were testing that pre-pandemic, and so this was a hugely different space for us to look at. We're going to publish a lot of our learnings in September with the sector, and I strongly believe, and we're going to put a toolkit out, and we will share, even down to contracting artists in this space, we need to really support the knowledge share of this, particularly, and how we look at rights and how we look at monetisation, not just for ourselves, but our makers and our... I think that what the pandemic has exposed in this particular area is that we have effectively had a main transaction for live performance, which is the ticket. And I think we need to break that down, and that's going to take a long time to break that down and build that up. And what we tested in Dream was two versions of performance. You could have a passive experience or an interactive. Wording may not be the best, but the interactive, you were going to be a firefly, and we put the interactivity in it was very, very quick turnaround for us. But what was fascinating to me is generationally, my son's 8, and my dad watched it in separate places, and they gave it a go, and Dylan totally got it, was just like, yeah, fine, and didn't think much of it. My dad thought he'd killed Puck with his fly, which was unfortunate. But I say that in jest, but it's a really important thing to note that in the online space, we have a whole generation of people that are coming through this that have never looked at this as other and different, and we have to, I'm mid-40s, and I have lived in a world of a non-digital world. I've grown up in that, and then I've learnt that. But we have a new generation now that thinks nothing of purchasing a skin in Fortnite. The sense of micro-purchasing within experiences online is not a radical concept to a generation that are already, there are commercial models out there. They are not within certain elements of the internet, but there is a whole internet that we are not part of, that we need to engage with, that does monetize and does commercialize. We need to think about that. But interestingly, you are quite right. They put a hierarchy in between the interactive and the passive. And what I realised is there are many people that are interacting passively. And that was a big learn for us, is that actually by showing up, engaging, you were interacting. And we need to take that further. And then the other thing we created was a lobby. And you showed up, and people were showing up about an hour before and talking and seeing a ticker go up, and that was some of the most shared. How do we create that as a commercial space? How do we get a digital ice cream? What's the equivalent of your program and all of that in that space to think about add-on levels of commercialization? So it's a huge piece of work. It's going to take a long time. Let's not pretend that there's a quick win solution.
And I don't want the takeaway from this to be, oh God, we've got to find a way of monetizing it before we could do it. Because I don't think that is where we're at the moment. At the moment, it's very much about it has to be about experimentation and exploration and being prepared to get it wrong and do things that don't work and all that kind of stuff, because otherwise we won't make the progress we need to make. So I just will mention that as a kind of, it's a theme and it will come back and we're going to have to solve it in due course, but I don't think it's the primary issue at this moment.
No, but I think the notion of experimenting with different forms of interaction is really interesting. Again, you talked about, one of you, can't remember who, talked about maybe opening boxes whilst watching something, the rituals, And I mean, I know that Ros is here, one of the Professor of Poetry lectures that we did early on, that we sort of, the English faculty did, and Torch kind of was involved in the digital production thereof. Alice Oswald, we went through this whole fantastically complicated process of getting things printed, posting them to people in advance, so that they could open a letter which had a poem in it. But the exciting thing about that was that in order to do that, you had to go outside and look at the moon, and in a sense thereby miss the lecture that was going on online. And so there was a sort of choice that you had to make. Either I'll carry on listening to her while she's lecturing, or I'll go and do this other thing that she's telling me I should in fact be doing. And I thought that was marvellous bit of sort of competitive but experimental space in that zone.
But also what I like about that is, I mean, it reminds me of another thing, which isn't about digital theatre, but I think it's very connected, which is that we found ourselves doing things. So we had a very simple idea around, we call it postcards from the pandemic, really, really simple. And you just say, yeah, I'd like to do a postcard. You get sent a blank postcard with a return address and a stamp on it, and you're asked to put something on that in connection with the theme that we gave people. People did that, sent them back, and then we sent them on to somebody else who then responded to it, and we then were having this sort of exchange. So the only digital bit of that was the promotion of it. So it was all physical, and it was all paper and pens and paint and cameras and stuff. But you suddenly had people who were living in, who were in hotels because they were homeless, local artists, people from the other side of the country, kind of exchanging artistic work with them. And the only reason I mention it is because, and also we thought, oh, that'll be 20 people, and we get sort of something like 300 sign-ups or something ridiculous, over a very short period of time. And the only reason I mention it is because although that isn't digital theatre, but strangely, the kind of thinking differently about what you can do to enable people to engage with each other took us into another world of, oh, well, maybe that's a nice thing to do. And it's somehow thinking digitally does take you into other things that aren't digital, that are still interesting and useful, because you're just thinking about art in a different way, or theatre, or engagement, or how it works in a different way, and you can actually apply it in an area that isn't digital at all. Does that make
It does
sense?
make sense, and in a sense, we started this bit of the conversation by thinking, do we now need a specialised digital offer? And in a way, your answer is, well, not necessarily. We can experiment with that, but actually, the digital, whatever it is, takes us into a whole number of other zones.
Yeah, and I don't want to put I don't want to have the kind of this is the live, and then this is the digital. Which do you fancy? I'd much rather find a way of it all going to being quite blurred and feeding off each other in different ways. And sometimes you're just going to come in and go to a great show or a gig, and we're not going to mention digital. It's not relevant. Just come and enjoy it and do whatever you're going to do. And sometimes we might do something that only works in the digital sphere. But a lot of the time, it'll be some mixture of that we haven't really fully understood yet, I think.
Sarah, you were going to come in a minute ago with the boxes and the opening, were you, or is the moment past?
Yes, there's just, it's looking at an audience, segmenting audience experience really, like what you're saying is giving audiences multiple pathways to enjoy the experience. And I think that one thing, sometimes we offer the thing, and that's it, and everyone experiences it the same way. And I hope that what's happened in this time is we can have one's experience of it, and in a way you do that with the narrative and the storytelling. We all sit here in this room together, we've said things today, people will take opinions, and people at home are listening, and they will have their truth of what's happened in this moment. And that's their equity in the space and how they take that away. And I think the same is how you experience the work. And I think that is something that's opened up in this time, is that if you can choose your experience more and personalise it, there is a monetisation fact, but also there's a fact is that you, from an audience perspective, you have more choices to engage in how you feel comfortable in that experience. I'd love to lose the D word. I really would love to lose it.
The D word?
The D word, and just talk about visionary experiences that we're all doing. And here are the multiple ways we can look at live performance and togetherness.
Don't call me old-fashioned, but I just want to say, as well as being in the space for the first time personally for well over a year, we've just got our first bit of print. Old-fashioned print for the Offbeat Festival with the Playhouse. And it would normally have been a big fat brochure, and it's just that because, why would you spend loads of money on a big fat brochure? But just to have a bit of print for the first time for about 18 months, it's just gorgeous.
That's so perfect, because print is going to bring me on to my next question, which is our last question for our little bit of the conversation, which is about archives and how do we archive all this.
Yeah.
And before we get onto that, I just wanted to say, both to people in the room and also people in the Zoom, do send in questions or get your questions ready if you're in the room. I've got my phone here because the questions are coming through to me on WhatsApp. I'm sufficiently old-fashioned to do that. But so that's why I'm looking at my phone, not because I'm bored with what's going on, all right? But archive then. So we're in this new visionary space. How do we archive any of this? How do we tell this story? Both how do we kind of, archive what we've done in the last year or two, but also in the future, what constitutes an archive for an organisation such as yourself?
I think it's very, because I hadn't really thought about this, and I think it's really interesting. Because you don't, when you go to a live gig or a live show, you don't archive it. I mean, you archive, you might keep the programme and the poster, just for sort of sentimental reasons. You might, for research purposes, you might have a fixed camera at the back that just recorded it so you can remember how it went for the benefit of the creative team. But the whole point is you don't archive it. The whole point is you're in the room, and it only exists in that moment, and that's the liveness of it. So once you put something online, of course, it now exists beyond that moment. And so now, what do we do with that? And do we want to keep it all? Especially if it was a live event, a live stream moment like this. Will you keep this forever? Or no, it's just happening now. And if you you can watch it on Zoom for a couple of weeks if you didn't manage to sign up on the day, but then that's it, because this is it. And I actually don't know the answer to it at all. I certainly don't think we will be archiving every single live show that we're involved in. Well, unless somebody, I don't know, I haven't had the conversation. I think it's a really interesting question though. Why would you archive something that was live?
I'm going to put that question to Emma, partly as a historian of theatre, sorry, but as somebody who, obviously you work with archives,
Yep.
should we be archiving all these live experiences?
So I feel that professionally you've set me up for my job to be, of course we should.
Yep.
But I think personally, I think probably not. I think that's probably, or I don't think we shouldn't be archiving, but I don't think that should be where our energies go. I think it's really interesting what Jeremy says about on demand. I mean, it's become a misnomer, hasn't it? Because actually, nobody demands it. It's sort of like off demand. And it reminds me of a sort of previous sort of technological fix where you could, record things on VHS tapes
Yes.
off the television, and by recording them, somehow you'd done the work, and then you almost never watched them. If you can't make the time at the time, you're never going to be able to make the time later. So I think there is a sense that in some ways this is an anti-archival moment because we're thinking about the unrecordable pleasures of liveness, and so there's a sort of, to be poncy, there's a kind of ontological question about what the archive is and whether the archive is pulling us away from the thing that we're trying to retrieve. Yeah, in some ways, we ought to sort of keep everything, but in other ways we're completely burdened by it, aren't we? I mean, just personally, but maybe we should ask kind of Marie Kondo, does it give joy, the archive? Probably not.
Sarah, does it give joy?
I don't know. Well, I was thinking from a different perspective, is like you do keep sets, so we keep physical sets to do it again and iterate, so from a maker perspective, but on Dream we made a 7-kilometre by 7-kilometre forest in a game engine, and part of me wants to keep that, but I don't know why.
Where is it?
It's like in the it's all digital files, and if you're thinking ethically, that's a lot of compute power and server space.
And environmentally, that's
environmentally.
So
I think we have
footprint.
a future challenge coming up with our archiving and effectively, I don't think we have a conscious understanding. We haven't, because we can't see it in the same way. We haven't got a logic around that yet. So I think there's different purposes, aren't there?
Yeah.
For different drivers for archiving. There's the audience archiving, there's the maker archiving. But there's also an opportunity by not archiving, then you can cultivate whatever narrative you like of what's happened. And you go back to how do you piece together the cultural memory of a moment. And social media is a great way to look at the collective social memory of experiences, I think. So I think we're archiving all the time by how we broadcast ourselves in that way.
But I don't think technically we've thought really how a digital archive. It's not like acid-free tissue paper, is it, and put it away for 100 years?
No, it's not.
I mean, this is a really active, 6-monthly management and refresh to make sure these forms are readable, and that's a hugely active process of management, which is quite different from the print archive. I mean, in some ways, sort of. Maybe metaphorically it's not that different, but I just think practically it's a huge burden.
Yeah, I was just thinking this might be the moment to go to the audience, and very happily Tom's put his hand up on this question. So Tom Kuhn, would you like to put your question? I might have to repeat it, as I said earlier, for the audience online.
It wasn't entirely a question, I'm sorry for butting in, I knew it wasn't really quite our turn, but it was specifically on the question of the archive. I just thought it was interesting that the Academy of Arts in Berlin has created a post and a mission specifically to archive theatre in the pandemic. They're not intending to collect everything that is created in Germany or has been created in Germany over the last year and a half. There's no way they can do that. But they do think it's very important to sample everything. And they are going about that in that precisely sort of careful and constructive way that you described. And I think it's a crying shame that they're not doing anything like that. I agree that archiving is never the purpose of the theatre work. That shouldn't be our priority. But it should be something that we're doing at the same time. Otherwise we can never look at it again. It's as simple as that.
So I'll try and summarise that. But So in, where was it in Berlin? The
in the Academy der Künste.
Okay, so the Academy of Arts in Berlin is precisely, a bit like Jeremy was saying, you've now got a digital officer here, have made a post for somebody to archive theatre in Germany during the pandemic. Obviously what they can't do is somehow encompass, keep a record of everything that happened. Instead of that, they're sampling across different shows. Tom, as again, partly a historian of the theatre and sort of Brecht's living representative on Earth, is kind of partly saying, well, that's a shame not to keep a stronger record of what's happening. Of course, one can't because one's not making theatre in order to archive it. But at the same time, if you don't, you can't come back to it later. And I mean, I'm with you to the degree that I think that it is a really interesting question. In a sense, what did you do during the pandemic, Dad? That people might ask in the future. What was that? So precisely so that we don't get the story, you know, during the Cromwell's time, all the theatres closed and all that. So we don't get false narratives about what was actually happening. But of course, it raises the question: how, not only how much can you store, but also how do you store? And I will open this up to the audience. There's a range of people here from a range of different cultural organisations and university spaces and so on. Do others have thoughts about this archiving question? Or does anybody out there in the wider world have particular thoughts about archive? I have one or two coming through, but is there anybody else in the room who has a thought on the... Yes, Tish.
Yes, it's very current that the Story Museum at the moment, because on a personal level, I'm trying to archive 12 years of email correspondence. That's sort of a side, it's not very creative, but somewhere, if I'd had lots of letters, I'd know which to just chuck in the bin and which were the precious ones about a particular arrangement or but yes, we're looking at how we, as a museum, archive. And we haven't got the answer in my colleague who's working particularly on the exhibition side of it and recording the artists who made the installations. And just also deciding how it's stored digitally, and then what are the hard copy archives. From the museum point of view, they've got a small space, which we filter out, and what paper they're on, and all those things. So we are looking at that. And also because people are beginning already, I'm getting calls although I step back from the museum saying, where can I find the details of the colour that we use for this or that, where it is.
So again, it seems to me that, so you're speaking about the Story Museum here in Oxford, and an already existing question actually that predates the pandemic, which is how do you archive emails anyway, as opposed to letters? But then also, what kinds of archives would one have? Is there just a digital archive for digital work, or do you actually print some of that out? Do you turn it into hard copy of some kind that might survive? To go back to your VHS question, I mean, who knows what digital will mean in 20 years' time? Will we be looking at even e-sticks and thinking, oh, blimey, what are they? So the question of the kind of constantly shifting means of recording and keeping the moment. But again, it seems to me you're saying this is a problem rather than we have the solution as yet, because I don't know that anybody's got the solution at the moment.
I think we're also, because people sometimes in the future maybe will go back, whether it's storing information we've got about Carol or any of the authors we've worked with, that's there.
Yep. Yep. I think you also mentioned filming people whilst they're making stuff. So for example, there's, I've seen on the Story Museum that there are sort of, those kind of motion capture things. And I think the RSC does that as well a bit, where you've got the motion capture film, I don't mean motion capture, I mean high-speed film of how things get made. Yeah. I think they're really interesting as archives, actually, because within sort of 30 seconds, you can see, blimey, that goes from there to there. And that, I mean, that's old-fashioned film technique in a way, but it's still a way of archiving a long process. Vicky, yes.
Recording things hugely accessible to a lot of organisations and individual artists because it is cheap, right? You can do it from anywhere if you've got Wi-Fi to bring people together for a panel, internationally. As soon as you start stepping into a space like Sarah said, and brilliant work done at the RSC, the costs go up. Right?
Yep.
And it's costs on tech and what have you. And of course, that tech needs to be continually reviewed and updated and what have you, and moved with the technological advances. So I suppose my question is about, I like the idea of losing the deep, but thinking about it from a financial perspective, like what do we need to do in 10 years' time to ensure that we're still maximising what we can do with recording things at its basic cultural level, but also creating work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we make sure people don't get left behind?
Mm-hmm.
Not just audiences, but maybe.
Mm-hmm. Are you about to answer that, Jeremy? So I'll just repeat the question. So the question was, in a way, it follows on from one of the archive questions that came in, which was, does that mean that we're going to need a particular role or a profession as the digital archivist in the future? And Emma, you're going, yes, we are.
Well, absolutely we are. I mean, what Tish was talking about, I think those sort of text archives that are document archives that are in digital form, I think there are already digital archivists at writers' archives and stuff which have gone to the Harry Ransom Centre or whatever. I think there are processes for dealing with those, but there's a related point about sort of born digital content.
Yep.
That is going to be more difficult to store and to give access to.
Yep.
And I'm sure that's a specialist profession right now, and it's changing all the time.
Yep. And Vicky's question then was, okay, what about the specialist profession of the people who make events like today possible? And how do we keep that as part of, including a financial model of what research and theatres are about?
I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's going to be a thing, undoubtedly. But I don't want to lose your other comment about the accessibility and the affordability of just getting a bunch of people together on Zoom,
mm-hmm.
which has included some really creative work. I mean, we had a Zoom show which was 3 performers who were in, one was in Oxford, one was in London, one was in New York, doing a show live that we all watched on Zoom, and it was a very new experience. I mean, it was great. It went really, really well. And so the fact that you can do that, I don't want to let go of that. Now, I don't think we'll do a lot of Zoom shows going forward because I think people have had enough of it in some regard. But my key thing here, it goes back to access, which is where your conversation began, actually,
mm-hmm.
which is that if we're creating a new specialism, you've then got which we will need to do because there's specialist stuff that needs to happen to make this stuff work. But the risk is that it again becomes an exclusive area of operation, and the sort of democratizing of access to what is happening that weirdly has taken place to some degree during the course of last year. We're in danger of losing that. So I'm just very preoccupied with how do we. So I think we in this building we have to get over this thing that the job is to get people to come to us. We want people to come to us, but we have to get over that as being the main thing. So we have to be able to go out in a way and be in the spaces that people are in, and that's physically, but it's also digitally, and that means, and they are people who would not feel comfortable or not normally come into an art centre, and they're the people I'm most interested in working with. So it's not necessarily about clever digital specialism, it's more about clever community engagement, and that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But that's my preoccupation.
I'll come to you in a minute, but there's some interesting questions coming in on the back of what you two have just said. And one person said, so are we then saying that live Zoom digital theatre opens up a new political space so digital theatre work without the need to be legitimised via either entrenched funding streams or established theatres?
Absolutely, absolutely. It offers, it widens the scope because in theory you can make something in your kitchen and get it out there. It has to be good enough for people to want to watch it. So it democratizes in that sense, but also it enables us to in terms of who will engage at the level in which they engage and what they engage with, including doing 5 other things at the same time as watching the show, becomes a possibility to embrace rather than be snooty about. And it actually ends up being about power and who's controlling culture and who's deciding what's good and who's deciding who watches it and who's deciding what's going out there. And this is an opportunity to try and break that open a bit.
Yep. So again, yes. So Zoom. Are you saying Zoom digital theatre practices question perceived notions of agency as well? And I think we all are in.
I slightly worry about Zoom being a utopia. I mean, we all know well enough now, if we're not paying for a product, we are the product. And presumably, at some point, that is going to come back and bite us. At the moment, Zoom seems wonderfully leveling, but it too operates in a world which needs to monetize the product, and that can't be long coming, can it? We're not going to be in this world, in this part of the project, I think, forever. I mean, it's striking how much better Zoom is than Teams, and that seems to me interesting for how the big tech works and gets monetized in our wider society. So yeah, Zoom's. We need to watch out, don't we?
We do, yeah. Well, we also need to be careful of utopias, as we know.
I just beat you the lines where.
Yeah.
Hi. My question is also about access and the kind of access that I'm particularly interested in as someone who works at universities, thinking about the access that young people have to theatre and how very, very mixed that is, as we all know. And I suppose I think that this is a moment that it's really important that we seize to try to think about how can we get more kids seeing shows. What can we do at this particular moment? So in the first conversation, when you were talking, for instance, about the fact that in different people's homes, you can't expect that everyone has the same headsets and access to theatre. But we could actually try to make that happen in schools, for instance. There could be shows that were happening during the school day that were live streamed to schools, and equipment was within schools. I know that's quite blue sky in terms of schools funding at the moment, but those are the kinds of things that perhaps we could be thinking about. How can we use this moment to try to democratise a sense of what kids get, what children, young people, all different ages are getting access to shows? And I just wondered if you thought about those issues in
Sarah, I'll come to you, but I just want to repeat what Marion said. So Marion, expert in Chaucer amongst many other things, and so interested precisely in how do we get schools access and engagement into this zone, and if I can embroider in a sense what you said, not be too optimistic and say, oh, young kids know how to live in this world already, but actually institutionalize it, make it part of what we do, so that there is proper access to the digital kinds of theatre making and storytelling within schools, but also for young people more broadly. Have I properly represented what you said for the online audience, more or less? Yep. Okay, Sarah.
I completely agree, but I think it's more fundamental. I think it's relevance and connection, less about the technology with a younger generation. What do you have to say and what connects with that part of our society? When we looked at Dream, we were looking at the technology, but we were looking at who could we work with that would not create what we had done already, but think about something different, to make a statement of making an entire show in a game engine. What would that look like? It's not going to look like this space. It's going to have a different identity. Then about the storytelling, embodied narrative, not necessarily much text in that, because it's about how you make it. It's about whose face they see. It's about whose voices they're hearing and how that resonates. It's the whole programming of it. But I'll give you some compelling statistics around Dream that I'm like, what do we do with that? It was an online performance. It was, in 10 performances, we reached 65,000 people showed up in 10 performances. It reached 92 countries, and 76% of that 65,000 people were new bookers to the RSC. And that was achieved because we did something fundamentally different. Of that, 40% were Gen Y and Gen Z. So my thinking is that what an exposure and a shift for us is, what do you do with that? How do you take that forward? You have to think about who you're working with where it's placed, how it's placed, and all those old cultural biases and the relevance of that. I completely agree with you, but it's making, and we had some comments of people from a texting or anecdotally saying, well, I wish I could still play with Puck, audience members saying, I wish I could still do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important to sit with for a bit, actually, that there is evidence out there, we can make that commercial. We have to think of the future theatre makers, of craft versus automation not being a bad thing, but looking craft in the eye and thinking, how do we craft our stories with the new tools that we have? But it's all about the storytelling, and it's the identity of what people are seeing and how it resonates with them.
Marion, do you want to come back on that? Or?
Yeah, well, I just wondered, do you have any stats about the socioeconomic backgrounds of the audience at all? And do you feel that you're also just able to reach people from more deprived backgrounds, from backgrounds where there might not be any family encouragement to access theatre?
So do we have the stats on the socioeconomic background of the people who were able to watch The Dream?
I don't have that on me today, but we did a
but
huge
you will
amount.
have in the report, presumably.
We've got a huge, we worked with Goldsmiths University, and there was a very, very long questionnaire at the end. But my point is we did a huge amount of research, and that's what we're learning. We may not have asked all the questions at the time of what we thought was relevant. Again,
it seems to me that's part of the archive question, is how do we archive, or how do we record and properly analyse precisely this question as well, which is who's watching what, and from where, when, and so on. That's part of the archive too, I think.
That's right, but also as a creator, I'm not necessarily asking the archival questions.
No.
So what's really interesting, being in this space, is that why I love working with academics and researchers is they're asking that question. But with the work with Dream and Audience of the Future, which was lovely, and the academics working with us were delighted, is we let them in, and they helped us make the creative decisions. So we were led by the research and the questioning to make the pivot online, and we wouldn't, it's possible we would have made something in virtual reality that very few people saw, but actually the knowledge that there was a massive digital inequity meant it was a harder thing to design, it was a much harder thing to deliver on. But in the end, what happened was an arts organisation in a collaboration was the first group of people to make a real-time, multi-platform experience in a game engine. It wasn't a technology company, and it also came from the research. So I think with the archive, it's a living dialogue. It's not a retrospective. It's actually a proactive question at the beginning of a process. I think if we can do more of that, that would be really awesome, and then we can think about that more. I'm not sure we always think about that up front. We have it at the end. Did we reach? And the question should be, how can we reach? And I wonder whether we need to think about the new terms and conditions and the new questions we need to ask coming out of the pandemic, like, is Zoom a false utopia? What does that mean for us? Are we, those are the questions.
Zena, there's lots of questions now. Zena was first. Zena, you might be asking this as a maker. I'm not sure.
Yes, I am making it as a maker. I'm asking it as a representative of a small theatre company. So obviously listening to this, it's incredibly exciting, this idea of like making local, disseminating globally. That's really exciting, especially if theatres are investing in technology, which means we don't have to pay for it. That's great. But my question is, there's a big space in the middle of that landscape that we haven't talked about, which is the bread and butter of small theatre companies, and that's touring. What is the future of touring for small companies like ours? In this local, global world?
Okay, so this is another question about, maybe it's not so utopian, insofar as there's people who are left out of this story potentially, which are the people who tour, who are used to touring, and in particular smaller companies for whom that's their bread and butter, that's their lifeblood. Priya, does your question follow on from that?
A little bit related to that, but there's a reason.
Yeah.
I was just curious to ask about whether you've noticed a shift in the demographics of artists and makers, because you have mentioned a few times that people have become more entrepreneurial. But is that people that were already quite well established in the world that you operate in, coming from certain types of backgrounds, and that have managed to adapt quite quickly? Or have you seen a new, influx of people from different ethnic minority backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds?
I mean,
massive cuts are coming to the arts and cultural sector, as I'm sure everybody in this room knows and
Yep.
is in front of. In connection with this question of touring in physical space,
Yep.
what have you done any research about artists and makers and who now is seizing these opportunities to do something new?
Yep.
And perhaps, when their bread and butter issues are really on the line as well.
Yep. So the secondary question then is a sort of wider question about the demographic of people who might be in a position to capitalize on, let's say, and make money out of the digital world, as opposed to the ones who get left out of it, whether that's smaller touring companies or people of different demographics who haven't been able to become quite so entrepreneurial or haven't found their access to. Do we have research in that area? Again, I don't want to put all the pressure on you, Sarah, to have done all the research. I don't think that's what we're saying. I'm not sure whether we have, but if we have, then...
We haven't done the I would pause to say we've done the research. We're certainly having the conversation, and touring is a really urgent conversation, massively urgent, and it is the ecosystem of which theatre exists, and it can't be ignored. And I think that it's a really important question as we move forward, that we're not looking at a binary either or, and that the touring model is part of our ecology, and that's how we expand the temporality of the experience and how it shifts in different spaces. So I think that needs to come in, and that's not had enough attention. And I think it's probably not had enough attention because we've not been able to do it. Do you know what I mean? So I don't think it's an intention to push that to one side.
Yeah, in it now. So
Exactly.
We're doing 3 nights, but we've also got a filmmaker coming in, and we don't know what to do about that intellectual collateral that we're creating.
That's right.
So we've got these wonderful university partners, and they're using the film for like therapy and public health and training actually. But what do we do about making it accessible? We're on the ground trying to make that decision. It's really hard.
Again, for the online audience, that's about one can film stuff that's happening, and your company is doing so, but what happens to the effectively intellectual property that's inside that film? Who owns that? How do you then turn that into a kind of monetizable and bread and butter work, whilst at the same time as touring your show? Because why wouldn't people just, in a sense, watch that for free? And that's, again, a really big question around it's not just a digital question. Again, it's a sort of, how do you make this stuff generally available, but at the same time keep live theatre, touring theatre going?
And there's lots of experimentation in this at the moment. We're doing quite a lot of work around contracting and also your image rights. So, for example, film rights and your digital asset as an actor. If you have your image like a photograph, but in digital data capture and stuff like that. So everything you're talking about is a live issue across the sector right now. I don't think we have all the answers, so we've just got to take a beat on that, if you know what I mean, and we've got to work that through. What I will say is fundamental is, maybe when we distribute that film, for example, how long you can distribute that film for, when it can be used to, like you were saying, bring in audience and highlight it. It's the sort of, not looking at it as the platform, but looking at it as how you use it to make success points in the touring work too. We've looked at like lifespans of when, so for example, Dream will be available to the end of September, and then it will come offline, because we've agreed amongst all the stakeholders, artists and companies, hugely complex agreement, 14 partners don't do that, that it's research and development, so we're putting it out there to understand. After that, if we want to use that again, full permission from all the creatives and remuneration, and that will be how it works. So we'll take it off, and we shouldn't worry, we should think about taking things off and on and what their value are. But it's a huge conversation, and we mustn't miss a beat on paying artists, and we mustn't miss a beat on creating sustainable models. With the rush to put work out.
Yeah. So we've got about 5 minutes left. Yes,
Can
Jeremy, go
do you
for
mind
it.
if I just follow up?
Yeah.
There are 2 points that are really, really important. I don't want to miss either. So this is a receiving house, primarily in terms of its theatre offer. Small-scale professional, some of the best small-scale work in the country. It comes in here, and And that's really, really important to us. The good news is, if there is any good news, is we're rammed from September right through to next spring with all the shows that couldn't come in for the last year. So that work is still there, and people are still wanting to bring. We don't know how that's going to go. We don't know, how much of an audience we can get in, and all that kind of stuff, and it's going to be complicated. But I do think for me, it's absolutely crucial that those small-scale companies and the small-scale venues that host those companies continue to be supportive, because actually there is still nothing more magical than being in the room in a small-scale live show in a small venue that far away from the performers, and the feeling the heat in that space of that interaction, and the people, and it's just that not enough people have had that joy, and more people need to be able to have that joy. So I think it's absolutely crucial. And in terms of which artists are benefiting from this, I mean, I know this is what everyone's talking about in the light of Black Lives Matter, that we have to get serious about being anti-racist as organisations, and we absolutely do. And I can't give you any research, globally about who's benefiting from this. But I know, I'm not, we are not alone. But we are serious about improving the proportion of artists who are from the global majority, who are getting access to commissions, who are getting access to the kind of offers that we're able to make. And we have done that, over the last 6 months. And we are, along with lots of others, ashamed of the fact that we haven't done that properly in the past, and we're very serious about that. But you have to put effort into that, because a lot of people think it's not for me because they won't want to know. We have to be able to persuade them that we do want to know. You have to, it doesn't just happen if you're passive around this stuff. You've got to be active around it, and we have to accept that we'll get it wrong, and we have to keep on working on it. So I don't want to lose that point, because I think it's really, really crucial, and it's true of so many different communities, not just those who are black or brown, but it's all sorts of people who haven't had the networks traditionally to be able to ease their way in smoothly into this kind of work, and we've got to crack that open as well. And I'm not pretending for a minute that we're at the front of that, but we are part of a whole bunch of people who are very serious about trying to do something about that.
You're going to have a whole other challenge from one of the questions that come in online, which I think will have to be our last question because we're running out of time, and that is, he or she says, they say, actually, during the lockdown, my perceived felt experience is that rather than sitting in a theatre, having to look round the person in front of me, as I watch something on screen, it's much, much more intimate. I don't want to get back in the theatre, is this what this person's effectively saying? And I'm sure that a lot of people feel that there's a degree of intimacy that's been produced from lockdown that's going to be hard for us to replicate in some sense here.
And I know you, so I'll let Sarah finish.
Well, no,
my reaction to that, if I'd read that 18 months ago or 50 months ago, whenever, I'd have been really saddened. I'd have thought, that is such a shame. We need to get you in, and now I'm going, fair enough. If that's how you want to watch it, good, that's fine. We'll try and make work that works for you. And that's our job, is to adapt to that reality. And I don't, why should people come in to an art centre if they don't want to? It's not like, no point me screaming at them saying, you should, it's good, you should. I've got to think differently about what we're offering so they can engage with it in the way that works for them.
So in response to the farewell to Zoom question mark that we started with, you're saying, no, we're not saying farewell to Zoom, we've at least got to keep the possibility of online interaction with audiences.
Well, it just seems to me that anybody who's ever made anything creative wanders into an empty space, or up to a piano, or into a gallery, into a studio, whatever it is, and might have an idea but doesn't actually know what they're going to end up with, and they spend a lot of time going, shall we do this? Yes, let's. And then discovering it was a really bad idea, and then trying something else until you gradually, and you go through a dark period where it doesn't work at all, and you think it's never going to happen, and you come out the other end. Every single creative process is like that. And my view about the digital thing, is it's exactly the same. Is we actually don't know. We don't know how to make all this work, but we have to be open to it. So we have to be going, okay, let's try that. Oh, that wasn't a great idea. Let's try this instead. And we'll get the hang of it. But we need to not close it down and say, oh, that doesn't work, and we're not going to bother with that. Oh, thank goodness we've got the theatres open, we don't have to bother anymore. We've got to allow it to help us to think differently, not just about digital, but about everything that we do. How inclusive we are, how accessible we are, how affordable we are, how well we pay artists, all those questions. For me, going digital helps us with that because it helps us think differently about it.
Thank you. Sarah, do you have, I'm just going to go along the line, and do you have anything you want to say by way of conclusion? I'm struck that your official title has the word digital in it, and you said, let's get rid of the D word.
I know, what does that mean? Gosh. I think digital obsolescence is a really interesting one, but that's for another time. I think that the pandemic's just exposed a lot, and we talk about digital as other or something. And I think what the pandemic has really fundamentally exposed is who are we for, what's that about? And it comes back to relevance, and it comes back to ourselves in context. And I think that we've not had that challenge, I don't think, in this generation in such a huge way. And it's going to create discourse, and it's going to create disagreement, and it's also going to bring new forms of solidarity that we didn't know were there. So I think I'm really curious about what work we make through this, and how we champion that, and we support that. We support the plurality of voices as we emerge through this, and not homogenise and actually get a heterogeneous approach to arts and culture. And that will be challenging, but it's a really important challenge for us.
Thank you. And Emma, both as theatre person and as university teacher, final thoughts for now?
I think I have a lot of sympathy with someone who says Zoom actually works just fine for me, and there's a lot of hassle in going to the theatre. I think for myself, I will try and resist that, because I think one of the things that's valuable about theatre is that it's one art form in which we don't engage entirely individualistically. It doesn't come to us bespoke. We can't really customize it in all its aspects. We have to sort of compromise and sit with it, and you have to commit to it. And I think that that's one of its that to me is going to be one of the values of live interactions of all sorts. It's not so easy just to drift off and put the kettle on, or whatever the sort of practical equivalent of that is. So farewell to Zoom ? I think we all know, for good and ill, we're not saying farewell.
Yeah, thank you. We've reached the end of our time today, but obviously not to the end of the conversation. Do add to the YouTube chat if you're out there adding to it. Some of you there's theatre tickets up for grabs in response to adding to the Zoom YouTube chat, I believe. But all that remains for me then is to thank you all out there in the world for coming, and also you all here in the room for coming, and to ask everybody to thank both our speakers and Arts at the Old Fire Station for putting together this event. Thank you so much.